And we're back again, continuing our strange foray here into the mysteries of one-E cognition and its peculiar relationship to physics. Now, in the last video I mentioned that my concerns here are not entirely mine alone. They are shared to some extent. And I pointed to the book The Blind Spot that recently came out, written by a physicist, two physicists and one embodied cognitive scientist, which pointed to the objectivizing activities of science and pointed out that they originate in the ongoing lived experience of scientists themselves, introducing something of a blind spot when it comes to experience. Now, in these videos, I've taken a similar tack and tried to simply consider the apparent secure knowledge foundation delivered by theoretical physics, and noted that it relies on certain idealizations, specifically with respect to light, and thereafter most physics is developed in relying on the constructs of space-time. That would be relativistic physics or 4D physics. I think we can call this 4D because it works with three spatial and one temporal dimension, although the difference between space and time there is somewhat peculiar. 1E embodied cognition starts in the body, and it doesn't necessarily buy into all the stories of the physicists precisely because space-time, those are concepts, aren't they? And whereas the lived body never finds a separable space and a separable time. So we're continuing this. We've noted that the measurement of space in physics uses a unit, the meter, which is applied indifferently to different distances between bacteria and galaxies. And we pointed out that this idealization is an idealization, and that in the real embodied world it doesn't do to measure length like that because you need a measuring unit. We've been over this and we've carefully avoided measurement of time. One discussion that the blind spot raises is an old one between Bergson and Einstein, in which Bergson tried to bring home the centrality, indeed the primacy, of lived time, the durée. And Evan Thompson wrote some very interesting words in there, and he pointed out that in this confrontation, any sense in which the past is present to us in the present, what we mean by memory, belongs to the durée and not to any physicalist framework. That makes conversation quite difficult. You see, measurement of space is one thing, but measurement of time uses the unit of the year, and from that the second. Now, the year is a fine thing if you're born on a planet that goes around the sun, and the year comes around and it's summer now, it's getting into summer, and all embodied beings find themselves, that I've ever met, find themselves in these cycles. The time scale of physics is an interesting one, and it's calibrated on the year and then abstracted away from the year to give us seconds and nanoseconds and gigayears and God knows what. But when you have a dimension, a scale, it's always interesting to ask what the 0 point on that scale is. And the stories that have been developed in this part of the world rely on a characterization of past time measured in years, as if years were like a unit, like the measuring stick. And the 0 on that scale, funnily enough, is Jesus. That's how ideal this is. The 0 on the scale with which time and historical events are laid out is a Galilean exorcist who lived 2,000 years ago. Now, if you're from 13th century Malawi or from Tierra del Fuego 300 years ago, I'm not sure you would acquiesce to a history in which some exorcist over in Galilee is providing the 0 point. So there are certain lingering cultural assumptions built into our fundamental understandings of time and space that are very, very interesting. Now, the book The Blind Spot came up in a nice conversation that was had yesterday in fact, between Justin Sledge, who runs the fine YouTube channel Esoterica. And Zevi, whose surname I forget, he runs the fine YouTube channel called Seekers of Unity, focused on mystical experience. Justin's channel is focused on esoteric knowledge. And the third party to the conversation was John Vervaeke, who brought the blind spot with him. He's a cognitive scientist interested in something called the meaning crisis. And it was very interesting to watch because the conversation was uncomfortable, if you don't mind me saying so. These are three people I have learned an awful lot from. And they're dancing around some very, very difficult topics. And epistemology is at the heart of it, epistemological claims and their relation to whatever we might call experience. You see, Zevi was there, and Zevi takes mystical experience very, very seriously. And there are ways of talking about, I'm going to vaguely indicate mystical experience. There are vague ways of talking about, maybe we could call it human potential, maybe we could call it potential experience. Talking of experience is difficult, and Zevi is very good at that, but he uses a vocabulary which is careful, nuanced, and somewhat humble, epistemologically humble. Justin and John seemed to be uncomfortable because they know that they're touching territory in which the words science and religion get mixed up, and that's always dangerous, isn't it? We'll have no such fear here, incidentally. But Justin was keen to emphasize the sensitivities to which people are sensitive. What are our sensitivities? Now, we've touched on this before. We've mentioned this photosensitivity, for example. And in the absence of a developed sensory epistemology and conceptual ontology that we might get from cognitive science, which unfortunately John Vervaeke is working with, sensitivities are really, really important because that which we are sensitive to is not captured at all in a physicalist vocabulary. Now, you might let that sink in. That which we are sensitive to is not captured in a physicalist vocabulary. So physicalism gives us these accounts of space-time, four-dimensional accounts. 1E living doesn't know about dimensions. Space arises, time arises, and concepts arise, and we start talking. But I'm talking in the present, without any insecurity, and without a meter stick, and without a clock. So, in going forward with this, I wish to continue the confrontation of 1E cognitive science with theoretical physics, but that leaves the 1E cognitive science kind of mute. There's no language for this, unfortunately. Physics has become so much the default background. I found it interesting when Wittgenstein was considering such interesting things as hinge propositions, the kind of thing like assuming the presumptions of the theory of relativity or assuming that one is an embodied being, these kind of propositions that can't be doubted. He said something rather interesting. He said, we are satisfied that the earth is round. Now, you know Ludwig Wittgenstein, he's always a good man for a laugh. And most people are satisfied that the earth is round. Did you know what? In a book written in German, he wrote that sentence in English. And that gives me reason to think English is part of the problem. Communicating in English means necessarily to buy into certain default assumptions that can't be questioned. If I were to speak a language other than English, I would then be from somewhere, right? And you'd have to account for my accent and probably my ancestors, spirits, gods, biases, and proclivities. I'm from somewhere. I'll give it a name, Ballybrack. You don't know what gods revolve around Ballybrack. We speak English here, but we speak it in a locally nuanced way. So English is going to enter this picture as part of the communicative problem in its default role as a communicative medium for discussing such matters. Right, we're going on, we're going to consider some things that we've learned about our sensitivities, including learning from neuroscience, but perhaps also from mystics and magic. Fearlessly on, I think. We'll carry on, right?